Hello, I'm Professor Nikki Gullace, Associate Professor of History at the University of New Hampshire. And I am here to answer some questions that alumni had about the death of Queen Elizabeth II and what it means for the British monarchy. The first question that many alumni asked was, what implications does the Queen death have at home and in other nations? I think that we've seen in the outpouring of grief and the huge queue lining up to see Queen Elizabeth's coffin, that at home, the Queen was beloved. She was a constant, a connection with Britain's historic past, and a reassuring presence in times of trouble. Abroad, as we'll soon see, her legacy is a little bit more controversial, and we'll get to that soon. The impact of her 70-year reign in Britain was to connect the British people with a legacy and a tradition that stretches back 1,000 years. On one hand, she was a queen using all the trappings of royalty and kingship and majesty that made Britain feel connected with its own long history. On the other hand, she was also a very important modernizer, a bridge between that terrible time of the Second World War and the modern nation Britain would become. In fact, she served in the territorial armed forces at home, and she gave Britain hope during a time when London was being bombed, and the royal family stayed in Buckingham Palace to show solidarity with their people. As one alum noted, she called her first prime minister, Winston Churchill, who was born in 1874, I believe. And she ended her reign by calling Liz Truss the most recent prime minister in 1975. That is 15 prime ministers whose lifetime spanned a century. And in each of these cases, she met weekly with the prime minister, held counsel with them, and advised them. So her legacy has been tremendous, both at home and abroad and throughout the Commonwealth. Now, alumni were very curious and concerned about whether King Charles would rule differently from Queen Elizabeth and whether he could fulfill the role successfully. In some ways, King Charles, as you can see from this slide, did not have quite the sense of humor his mother did. And I think that will be difficult. It will make him an object of ridicule at times, such as when he couldn't control himself from becoming enraged over a leaking pen. On the other hand, I think that Prince Charles shares the Queen's tremendous sense of duty. Coming to the throne, though, at a relatively old age of 73, as opposed to in the flower of her youth, as the Queen did when she assumed the role of Queen at age 25, is going to be more difficult. I think, as we all recognize, there is a great deal of sympathy for youth and beauty in a way sometimes there is not for someone more seasoned and older. And I think Prince Charles is going to have to negotiate this, as well as cries that we're seeing from many quarters that he should simply abdicate in favor of Prince William, something that I personally don't think he will do, because it would break the tradition of hereditary monarchy. Another alum asked a question that I particularly enjoyed, which is, will Camilla ever wear the Imperial State Crown? Camilla, I think perhaps appropriately, is going to do something even more daring. She is going to wear the Koh-i-Noor diamond crown. This crown, like Camilla herself, is extremely controversial. The Koh-i-Noor diamond was mined in Persia. It was appropriated by the British through treaty. It is worth millions, and some say perhaps even billions of pounds. In 1937, it was embedded in this imperial crown for the Queen Mother. The jewel, however, is claimed by India, it is claimed by Iran, and it is claimed by Afghanistan. All three nations claim that the British illegally expropriated this jewel that should be rightfully theirs. And the British, on the other hand, claim that it was ceded to them by treaty. It is a cursed diamond because so many men have died fighting for it, and therefore only female members of the royal household can wear it. Whether Camilla should be wearing a cursed diamond or not, I don't know, but it will be quite a spectacle when it happens, and I think we can expect to see lots of protestations from those countries who believe it is rightfully theirs. Now, several alum asked about the criticism of the monarchy and its connections to the injustices of colonialism, and they wondered how Charles would ever navigate these difficulties. Now, first, I want to explain to those of you who were wondering why the members of the Commonwealth are so incensed about Britain's colonial past. First of all, Britain, early on in the 17th and 18th century, practiced slavery, particularly in their Caribbean sugar colonies. They transported slaves from Africa to the Caribbean, and the Caribbean slaves worked in brutal circumstances, creating sugar, which was then sold in Britain and Europe and made the crown and many, many wealthy aristocratic families in Britain extremely wealthy. Through the 19th century, even after the British Crown abolished the slave trade and abolished slavery in its own Caribbean islands, imperialism itself continued to expropriate people in India, in parts of Africa, and still in the Caribbean. In India, for instance, Indians were forced to farm cash crops, such as opium, which was used to sell in China in order to improve the trade deficit with the Chinese, who had many, many items that the British wanted. As we've seen, they took jewels, they took crops, they raised an army from Indian soldiers, and when they faced rebellions, they meted out reprisals in a brutal fashion. And in fact, this brutal suppression of anti-imperial rebellion went on into the 1950s, including the suppression of the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya, where people were captured, put in concentration camps, and tortured. And this was at a time when the Queen herself had just become Queen and was talking about the, quote, family of nations in the British Commonwealth. What this has led to, particularly in Commonwealth countries that were initially formed under slavery, is a request and a demand, in fact, for reparations from the British Crown and for restitution, and among younger members of the Commonwealth for independence from the British Crown itself. So it is a very difficult situation from the Crown to navigate. And I believe that now the Queen is dead, the Commonwealth is likely to gradually fade away. And in fact, there is little King Charles can do to stop that. One of the alumni asked if the monarchy is still relevant in the modern world. And I think this is really an excellent question. For those who argue that it is relevant, they point to the pride Britons feel in the monarchy, its constitutional role, the pageantry, the source of unity provided by the crown, and in fact, the incredible tourism dollars that it brings into Britain. And it makes Britain stand out, doesn't it? Where else can you go, have a vacation, see the changing of the guards and the crown jewels, and imagine yourself into a historic past that stretches back 1,000 years? For those who do not think the crown is relevant, they look upon it as a source of incredible inequality. They ask, why should a family, through hereditary acquisitions, be able to pass on this tremendous wealth from generation to generation and even receive further subsidies from the taxpayers? And as we've already seen, there are members in the Commonwealth who ask, why should we still swear our loyalty to a head of state who is a queen and part of the same royal dynasties that oppressed us back in the days of slavery? So this is a question that is going to go on. And I think the question was paused in part by Queen Elizabeth because of her tremendous popularity, not just nationally, but in many parts of the world. But under King Charles, these questions are very likely to reemerge. Another question that our alumni had was, what will the firm be like without Elizabeth? And what of Harry and Meghan? I think without Elizabeth, the firm is going to lack a very strong person whose word is always final. I think Harry and William are going to be more inclined to question Charles than they ever would be to question Elizabeth, as is the British public itself. I think, though, as we saw from the walkabout in Windsor, William has recognized that the breach with Harry and Meghan is hurting the crown. And he's made several concessions already. The first was that he telephoned Harry and invited him and Meghan to meet and greet people at Windsor Castle, people who were bereaved by the death of Elizabeth. And Harry and Meghan came and did it. While there wasn't much interaction between the couples, it was an important symbol of unity over the death of the Queen. We also saw another concession. Initially, the palace said that Prince Harry would not be allowed to wear his military uniform at some of the final events surrounding the Queen's funeral. However, they were going to let the disgraced Prince Andrew wear his. Again, there was public outcry, and the Crown conceded and will allow Harry to wear his uniform. I think there's still much tension surrounding what may be in Harry's forthcoming memoir, but I do think that Prince William is going to try and repair things in the hope that the firm will keep chugging along for at least the next 20 or 30 years, at which time he will assume the crown himself. Just to wrap up, I think the symbol of the rainbow that appeared at the time of Elizabeth's death, simultaneously with the lowering of the flag of Windsor, and so beautifully photographed over the Victoria Memorial in front of Buckingham Palace, seemed to many Britons to be a sign of hope and a sign of continuity for the monarchy. But as we know, much controversy is there, and the crown will face many challenges in the future.